What's up, everybody? Today on the show, we have Daniel Bach. Dan is a great coach out of Austin, Texas, where he helps a number of athletes in a variety of different sports improve their sprinting ability, jumping ability, strength outputs, and their overall athletic performance. I've followed Dan for a number of years now, and I've gained a lot of insights by following his content on Instagram as well as his website. In this episode, we talk about vertical jumping, sprinting, strength training, all of it as it relates to running faster and being a better athlete. So if you have interest in jumping higher, sprinting faster, or just becoming a more athletic person in general, then this episode is a great one for you to listen into. As always, this episode is brought to you by sprintingworkouts.com, where you can find a lot of information, articles, programs, and other services related to sprinting faster. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy, and let's get to the episode. All right, so thanks, Dan, for coming on. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. I know you're busy with training athletes and putting in good work down at Acceleration. You're in Austin, Texas, right?
Correct.
Cool. How long have you been there?
8.5 years now. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the like the speed science videos you did a while back and the Jump Science University videos from 7 or 8 years ago, and it's funny to look back at that because that was some of the original content that I saw from you, and then I
Sure,
found you
yeah.
on Instagram, and I'm like, wow, this guy's pretty, straight to the point. He doesn't mess around with much fluff. It's like grounded in science, but also not beholden to every single thing having to be completely verified by some study. But your
Right.
your your foundation you come from seems to be based in research. I know you studied some of this stuff in school and have gone through a traditional route, but you also are willing to expand a little bit outside of that and try to be, somewhat cutting edge with what you do. So how'd you get to this point? Where did you start from as an athlete maybe and then get into coaching? How did that develop for you?
Yeah, so my origin story started with jump training when I was 13. Started dunking in the driveway, started doing some squats and calf raises in my basement. And just kind of got hooked on the training process with that. So had a lot of success in those early years as a teenager, and by the time I was 15, I like wanted to be a trainer, wanted to be a coach,
Mhm.
and help other people do what I had done as far as like the jump goals and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, I had like a pretty insignificant basketball career, but I was always a good jumper and continued to kind of train and experiment throughout my teenage years and into my early 20s. I did Yeah, I started, went to college and got an exercise science degree, and during that time is when I first started training other people.
Mhm.
I think I was Yeah, it was probably when I was 20, like just a little bit before I turned 21, that I started training people. And initially it was, just jumping stuff, and that's what I knew. And then, a few years later, got a chance to work with some track athletes and saw how, some of the same things applied to speed, and ended up getting more more interested in track and field at that time, really, because the sport is committed to athletic development.
Mhm.
It's like you just have to get faster or like
Yeah.
just jump farther, like
Yeah.
it's not learning plays and defenses and learning a jump shot, or all the things that go along with team sports. So so yeah, I got interested in track and field there. Got involved with the track team at my high school for a year after college, and then fortunately got the chance to come down to Austin and start training people at Acceleration, which is a place that is known for speed training. And and yeah, so football and track are two of the bigger sports that we have. So really the coaching that I do in person is probably more focused on speed than jumping.
Mhm.
Um, Even when I have jumping athletes, like I have, basketball, volleyball, but I still want to use sprinting for them as a complementary thing
Mhm.
to develop explosive qualities and develop, that bounce off the ground. Um, so yeah, I've really gotten a lot into the speed realm, and yeah, throughout all that, I mean, I definitely come from a place of learning from experience first,
Yeah.
and then as I went through school, I kind of learned why some of the things happened the way they did, like why they worked. Getting some of that science background helped sort of fill in the understanding on that. And then, there's also been times where research has, shifted, or I don't know if it's ever like transformed my view on
Yeah.
something, but it's definitely like, shifted my understanding, or, helped me understand something where I'm able to, interpret something better. Um, so yeah, but I also recognize, with coaching and training experience, like the diversity of people and the not black and white nature of things, and just the complexity of the human body means that research has like severe limitations,
Yeah.
right? I mean, for the big one being, well, you're looking at average results across a population is generally what it looks at, and what that tells you is maybe like what are the odds of something being effective for a particular population. But then even, that the selection of that population is usually very generalized, right?
Hmm.
Inactive males or
Yeah.
recreationally active males, or just, like male athletes with no other, insights on who they are
Hmm.
and what their abilities are. So yeah, I recognize there's a huge limitation there of the ability to take, generalized results across a population and apply it to the person who's in front of you. And so, yeah, when we're coaching individuals, or even if you're coaching a team, but you have a team full of individuals that have differences in them, um, you can't just say, oh, well, the average in this population of 20 people was positive, therefore that will work for all 20 people on my track team.
Right.
You have to at least try to have insights that go well beyond what research is telling
Hmm.
and some of those attempts may be wrong, but you have to try. You can't just be like, oh, you know what, this study showed that squats improved sprint speed, therefore we're all just going to do squats, you
Yeah.
know or whatever it may be, or
Yep.
Nordics reduced injury rates in the study, therefore we're all just going to do Nordics and assume it reduces injury rates.
Hmm.
We have to at least attempt to have insights that go well beyond that. And yeah, when it comes to solving those individual puzzles. So yeah, it's a good balance, I would say. Yeah, in spite of me being, jump science, speed science, I I still come from a place of my own thoughts and my own experience and other people's experience, and sort of interpreting that first, and then using research as sort of a like a corrective guideline,
Hmm.
where it's like, oh, you know what? So we have this theory and we maybe made some observations that make us think this, but tested in research doesn't really pan out. Okay, so maybe there's a different interpretation.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's not research on a pedestal. This is how we learn. It's more like research is one way we have of testing ideas, but it's not the source of, where we start from, I would say, or at least not where I start from. Yeah.
Yeah. We can, as coaches, we have to use our coaching eye. Our there's an intuitive aspect to coaching. You can watch someone move and very clearly see, okay, something's wrong here. The typical intervention I would use is not going to work for this person. Maybe I need to regress it. Maybe they need to do
Mhm.
goblet squats because if you throw a barbell on their back, they're going to, fold like a pretzel. Or you see a kid
Right.
running down the track and you might have a cue that you like to use or whatever it may be. If you're into that sort of thing, it's probably not going to work for this kid where it might work for that kid. So you have to be open to, you know, just using your own brain, looking at the person and seeing
Hmm.
what makes sense as what's going to help this person best. It's typically going to be different from other people that you're working with, whoever it is, and then you can stay grounded in certain realities and not get too far away from those realities by being well versed in what the research is. It doesn't mean that you're, stuck to whatever program they came up with in some longitudinal study that this is the program that works. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but it can
Yeah.
it can help inform you, keep you grounded, and make sure you don't get so far down the intuitive path that you're not doing something that's just ridiculous and
Right.
isn't going to
Right.
produce any results. So,
Yeah.
so being the jump science guy, I do have to ask real quick, what is your best vertical jump ever?
So around 43 inches
Man,
with an approach.
that's good.
Yeah.
It's pretty high.
Um, Unfortunately, when I was jumping my highest, I was not testing on a vertex.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an estimate based on, what part of my arm I'm getting on a rim or,
Mhm.
whatever, like that type of thing, or how high above the box on the backboard I could touch. It's kind of an estimate. But yeah, when I was jumping my highest, I was dunking.
Mhm.
I wasn't testing on a vertex. So yeah, I don't really know specifically like what my best day could have been. But yeah, in the low 40s for sure.
Yeah, that's really solid. I never cracked 40. I think I hit on a Vertec, I hit 39 and a half in college, but
Okay.
I don't know if I was cheating the reach or what, but I did get up pretty high and I was happy
Right.
about that. But, it's funny you mentioned that because I've heard a lot of people say, when I play football or when I play soccer, I sprint a lot. I feel like I'm sprinting a lot faster than when I'm on the track being timed or something like that. And I think there is something to be said for if you're training your jumping, but the sole outcome that you're looking for is not specifically jump height, you might jump higher because you're trying to dunk the ball. You're not thinking about how do I get as high as possible and then tripping yourself out mentally over that. You're just
Hmm.
in the zone trying to make it happen. You can't overthink a dunk, otherwise you're probably not going to make it. If you overthink
Right.
sprinting, you're probably going to run slow. So there's something to be said for having, yeah, you want to jump high, but if you're training it in a way like by training it through dunking, you may get a better result than if you were just simply measuring on a Vertec or a contact mat or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for the environment, obviously. But then also there's something to be said for having fun.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm just like, you're expressing yourself as an athlete, trying to do something cool, ideally, with your friends or what,
Yeah.
like whatever. And yeah, I think that should be the base of your, explosive training, really,
Hmm.
rather than yeah, testing your vertical
Right.
for sure. And trying to just jump up and touch something high can be fun as well. But it's probably more fun when you're not testing,
Hmm.
you know? And then maybe there's that day where you like, let's say you're trying to just touch the rim or something, and then there's that day where you suddenly get it with your palm, and now you are jumping higher, but your goal is still just, oh, I'm trying to touch that thing. Like it's just fun. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. Again, very hard thing to prove with research.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's based on yeah experience of myself and a lot of other coaches. Where that's yeah you want that to be the foundation rather than just testing your bird all the time.
Hmm. Yeah, I know with my high school team that when practice is more enjoyable, it doesn't mean that the rep they run isn't hard or that, we're not putting in good work, but when there is some levity in the session and people are smiling, they're excited to be there, we're always going to get better performances rather than if I'm super serious and oh, we got to hit these times or, whatever some coach might say. You put that pressure on them and it just I don't know. You have to set them up for success and put them in an environment, like you said, where it allows them to express their skills naturally, as opposed to um, just bearing down on those performance outcomes all the time. I remember Randy Huntington was talking about training Sue, and he was saying how, look, I don't really care what he runs in practice most of the year. I'm not trying to have him set a personal best every single time he comes out to the track. We might be working on a specific part of the race. We might be, trying to load him up, whatever it may be. But it's not always about what time did you run today. That doesn't necessarily dictate what you're going to run at a competition. And especially when you're dealing with younger athletes, most of them aren't going to go to college and play, or if they do go to college, they're probably not going to become a professional athlete. So we want to give them not only an opportunity to improve, but also to enjoy the time that they spend while doing it because years down the road, that's what they're going to look back on. Oh, that was a lot of fun. And maybe then they'll want their kids to go in. Whereas if it's too serious and it's just dry and all about, oh, you didn't run fast enough or jump high enough, they might be turned off, and that might not set us up well to have good athletes coming out in the future. And on that topic of high school athletes, if you were looking at three groups of athletes, you have, your high school athletes, you have some post-collegiate athletes, maybe like me, where I'm not the fastest guy out there, but have a high, I've trained for a long time, still trying to run faster. And then you also have a group of elite athletes who are at the top. So with sprinting itself, are there differences that you would, immediately think of when training those different populations of people, or would it purely be individualized based on what you see with that individual athlete at those different levels?
So first of all, I would say, I wouldn't just immediately jump to some big difference between them where it's like, oh yeah, I know for sure that this is going to be different. Um, I would say, with the professional where you're trying to eke out a small PR come season time, I would be less inclined to test a bunch in the off season or in practices, um, just because you're not expecting or even really trying to transform them athletically.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would still test somewhat regularly because you want to have an idea where their body's at.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas with the high schoolers, and it's definitely a balance to strike with the things you were talking about. With the high schoolers where it's like maybe they have college aspirations and and that we're trying to get half a second faster in the 100 meters like
Hmm.
in a year.
Yeah.
um you kind of have to know as you go, like, are things changing? Are we headed in the right direction, in the sense that are we going to open the season with a PR and then get faster from there? Because if you don't, I mean, getting that big chunk of improvement you're looking for gets pretty tough.
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, I would say actually testing more often with the young kids.
Hmm.
But yeah, it is a tough balance because you just okay, fly time test, fly time test is gonna wear you down mentally, and it's not that much fun. Except the days where you do get a record or whatever, it's
Yeah.
fun. Um, so yeah, especially I do one-on-one training, so I don't have the team environment generally, and so yeah, like let's say running 560s with even like a group of three might be kind of fun
Hmm.
for people, especially if they're competing for maybe for one of the reps or two of the reps. Like that's going to be more fun than you and a coach one-on-one and you're doing 560s
Yeah.
and you gotta wait 5 minutes in between. I mean, that's just boring.
Yeah. Story of my life.
Yeah, right. And that's why it's actually a good testament to what you've done, like being able to still be as fast as you are training by yourself.
Thanks, man.
Um, and I think about that with Kyle too, not a jumper.
Yeah.
I know you guys are familiar with each other. So yeah, I think training alone or training one-on-one with a coach is tough. But yeah, I do want to test more often. I with the young kids, it's like I want them in October, November, December to hit like a fly time record.
Hmm.
Where it's okay. I think today you could run a PB in the 100 meters if you got on the track, and it's November or it's December. Um, because again, we're hoping to make those big changes in speed over time. So that's one difference. Another one that comes to mind would just be the challenges of staying healthy. I got to think are harder with one, just older athletes, but two, faster athletes. Like the faster you are, the more dangerous sprinting is.
Yep.
The more athletic you are, the more dangerous being an athlete is because everything's more forceful, more violent. So um, definitely more inclined to sprint fast a couple times a week with a young, let's say, okay, like a young high school sophomore who runs a 12.9 in the 100.
Hmm.
I'm not really concerned at all about like pulling a hamstring. Like, oh, I mean, depending on the athlete, but
Of
yeah, like
course.
I have a couple athletes that like good robustness, good durability, like good training history. Like I don't have any concerns really about them pulling a hamstring sprinting. Whereas if I have a 28-year-old who runs a 10-2,
Yeah.
which by the way, I have not trained anybody like that yet. So, but
Emphasis on yet. It'll come.
yes, yes. But so definitely more concern in that situation, right?
Mhm.
About, okay, well, maybe we're not gonna sprint full speed twice per week all year long, or So, um, yeah, those are a couple differences. But yeah, I think probably the bigger theme is like what you said, where it's really going to be an individual thing.
Mhm.
Where I'm looking at those, the traits that they have. I'm looking at their athletic background, and the history of how different training has affected them, and all these things, and then coming to a solution for the individual rather than just categorizing them into developmental, intermediate, like elite, like, and then just having a program for those. It's definitely going to be more individualized, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Because within each of those groups, you could have athletes with completely different training histories, completely
Mhm.
different, movement abilities. Just because someone's fast doesn't mean that they are a well-rounded athlete. They may be very good at
Right.
that one thing, but they may be missing something that is either holding them back, making them more prone to injury, or something like that. So if you're a coach out there and you happen to take on a really high-level athlete, yeah, you may be able to jump to very specific things and, different forms of lifting, or they might need a more general approach at times simply because they have gaps in their development. And and like you said, as long as an athlete, say on the younger side, as long as they have been progressed up to a certain point, you know that okay, this person can sprint, it's not day one at practice, they're probably going to be able to handle in reasonable volumes higher intensities of training because their version of high intensity is not the same as, like you said, someone who's running 10-2. If you're driving a Honda
Right.
Civic, it's not going to blow up the same way as something that's, supercharged with nitrous and all this stuff. The risk involved is very different between the Honda Civic and the F1 car.
Yep.
Um,
For sure.
so one thing with sprinting is our time constraints with producing force are very short. It's very brief. You have great videos on ground contact times and talking about that. And, um, so if we're limited to 80 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, or we're long jumping and you may have 120 milliseconds on the board, how are you thinking about developing strength for those athletes? Let's assume that they have a good general base. They've done, they know how to squat, hinge, lunge. Maybe they've done barbell back squats, deadlifts. Like they've done some training. They're not
Hmm.
a completely fresh athlete. When you look at strength training for sprinters, how how are you approaching that? Is it just simply if we get stronger and they sprint, they'll be able to take that strength they've developed and apply it in short time frames? Or are you modifying anything within your strength and conditioning or your plyometric work to try and shift things toward producing force in those very short time constraints that we're limited to when we sprint?
Yeah. So big topic. I would say one, yeah, you have to recognize like the specificity of sprinting and how short the time frames are, and so then you definitely don't assume anything regarding transfer. Um, I think you can hope for general strength to transfer,
Hmm.
but the big thing is going to be test and find out as you go.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, what you want, I would say, what the scenario you want is okay, we're sprinting, we are doing plows that also train us to get off the ground relatively fast. And if we have that piece in place, and then we do a reasonable amount of general strength training, and yeah, I mean, squats, split squats, deadlifts, like general strength,
Yep.
not specific strength. We hope that, okay, we get stronger over time, but because we're still doing all these other things that are fast off the ground, then we'll just get faster as we get stronger. Okay. That's what you want. It's
Hmm.
simple. You just steady progress over time. It's the concurrent training model, right? Or the conjugate method applied
Hmm.
to sprinting, where just getting better across the board at everything. You can hope for it. You can want that. It probably isn't going to play out that way,
Hmm.
like long term. You know, we have these cases. I know, like, the West Side disciples, they love to boast about, oh, such and such athlete, good fast football player came and he did 6-week box squat program and took 3/10 off his 40. Okay. So we had what, 10, 15 years of being a football player and sprinting. And then, yeah, so you added some strength training to that, and it was good over the short term. How did the next 6 weeks go? How did the next
Hmm.
6 months go? Did he continue to get faster? Um, and so, yeah, I think the reality is at some point you're probably going to get that disconnect between general strength and speed. And that's true, I would say, for, like pretty much for anybody. In particular, if you have someone who has a history of like lifting a lot and maybe not sprinting as much,
Hmm.
then I'll get football guys that, as say a high school junior, they got beyond a double body weight squat, and they can't break 5 in a 40.
Yeah.
They may not break 5.2 in a 40 even. And so in that case, it's sort of a more of an extreme example where like you actually are way more developed in the strength department than the speed department, and you should probably get away from general strength training, maybe for the foreseeable future,
Hmm.
if speed is really your goal. Um, then yeah, I think you hope for it to be maybe more of a short-term disconnect where, okay, now we have, let's say, a sprinter who is primarily speed trained, and let's say they strength train consistently for, let's say a 3-month period in the off season, and during that time they get stronger, maybe their broad jump gets way better, their standing vert gets better, maybe even their acceleration gets better, but maybe their top speed sort of comes down a little bit, so they're like generally a better athlete but not specifically in max velocity.
Hmm.
So then you would say, okay, well, we just need to like kind of, shift a little bit back so that we get good at that fast thing. And so for them, maybe it's more of uh we're gonna take a 1 month break from general strength training. And then we're gonna shift back and we're gonna see that top speed come back, and we're gonna be in a really good spot going into the track season.
Hmm.
Something like that. A different scenario. You hope for more of that short term disconnect, and then you just like sort of a quick fix. Um, and then so yeah, like that shifting back to speed, that's where I think you can get those modifications of the strength training where yeah, you're gonna maybe use something to check and like or to like track your strength ability
Hmm.
without being disruptive. Okay, so what I like, people use the terms like specific and non-specific, and or yeah, specific in general. Um, I tend to view it more as, this like the specific strength training. I don't view it as like this is going to make us faster.
Hmm.
Rather, it's like how much is it going to mess with specificity?
Right.
And so then I call things like more disruptive or less disruptive.
Hmm.
Okay. So an example of, more disruptive strength training would be deep squats
Hmm.
or deep split squats. Maybe even deep hinges, which is a tough topic that uh,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have a great answer for, but an RDL is not specific to sprinting at all.
Right.
It is really good for your general hamstring development, but is very much not specific to sprinting. So that's even one that we could talk about. Whereas less disruptive would be hex bar deadlift,
Hmm.
because one, it's less range of motion. Two, it's generally it's going to be like concentric focused, so it's not going to have the same structural adaptations of like a down and up squat or a down and up split squat. A box squat would be less disruptive than a deep squat.
Yep.
Same concept as the hex bar deadlift, less range of motion, and then it's concentric focused. Or then like the more, shifting even further in the less disruptive direction would be your power clean. It's similar to the deadlift concept, but it's faster now too.
Yeah.
Or snatches, obviously, weighted jumps, or even like rhythmic up and down weighted jumps. If you're not getting like real deep in a squat position, those are examples of training strength, but in a less disruptive manner. Okay, so yeah, the way you would use that type of strategy would be, let's say we're talking about that sprinter who lifted in the off season again, and now we're trying to shift back explosive, right? To get that top speed to show up, but we don't want to lose the broad jump gains that we got. We don't want to lose the vertical jump gains we got. So we're going to use, a power clean once per week, and we're going to use, some type of weighted jump once per week, and we're going to track performance in those. And as long as we're able to perform well on those, then we know we're not losing strength, or at least we're not losing strength that shows up in explosive movements. You may
Right.
not,
Yeah.
if you don't squat for a month, you're probably not going to turn around and hit the same max squat.
Yeah.
But in terms of things that are going to like really plug into your sprinting, yeah, if you can maintain the power clean, maintain the jump squat, that type of thing, that's a good indicator to you that you're not losing the adaptations you gained from your lifting.
Mhm.
And then if those things are performing well, you don't have to be in a rush to get back to general strength training. And I think, people, you'd often be surprised by what can happen on those like sort of explosive strength training performances when you stop general strength or like stop maximum strength training.
Mhm.
Um, Especially if you've been training strength pretty hard. If you stop it for a few weeks, you very well may see your power clean shoot up,
Yeah.
or you're standing vert like a few weeks later, like it's higher, because one, you're not training slow anymore, but two, you're just getting fresh
Mhm.
because you've removed sort of a fatiguing stimulus with the heavy lifting, and so your nervous system, or whatever other components go into like fatigue and freshness,
Right.
you're getting more fresh, and so then that explosive performance can actually increase. And yeah, a lot of people are surprised by that, like, whoa, I stopped squatting and my vert is like like 3 inches higher now. It's like, yeah, I mean, you go through that, like that happens. That's very like a pretty common phenomenon. Um, so yeah, that super long-winded answer to that question, but
Oh, no
those are,
worries. It's all good.
yeah, those are some of the strategies I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed in my own training that when I get away from longer time under tension movements, whether that's the reason or that's just like the easiest thing for me to like look at and be like, okay, I spent a lot of time in that movement. I noticed those are more fatiguing for me as far as my sprint performances. So
Mm-hmm.
they're typically going to be better for developing strength or developing hypertrophy. Maybe, you got to build your glutes up or your quads or whatever it is. Those exercises are great for that core level development. But then if I'm trying to sprint really fast, if I'm doing a lot of that long time under tension work, that's where I start to see it be, like you said, disruptive to my sprinting. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really great way to look at it is, specific general, eh, I don't necessarily think those terms are great either because everything we do outside of our sport is going to be more general than it is specific because it's not the thing that we're training to improve.
Right.
But how disruptive is it? And at what point in the year are you willing to be disruptive to the main quality? Because you can't simply just train all out sprinting the whole year round and expect to have a linear progression of improvement. Eventually you might
Right.
become desensitized to that stimulus and your body's just like, I don't want to adapt to this anymore. But the same goes for those more general or more disruptive forms of lifting as well, where at a certain point, your progress there may start to stagnate and you're trying to get into a period where you're running fast. Okay, let's shift to less disruptive lifts or jumps or whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden, now that fatigue goes out of the system. Now you can express that strength that you built, but express it at a higher velocity and have the result that you're looking for of sprinting faster, jumping higher, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think this is most true, and we have to like, find solutions for this the most when it comes to max velocity sprinting,
Yeah.
because it's like the furthest thing from general strength.
Yeah. And it's so
And
sensitive.
yeah, and it's super sensitive, and you have to be fresh, and you have to, yeah, like let your body really tune into that movement to do your best performance. And so there's this narrative that like the interference effect essentially doesn't exist.
Hmm.
And the anecdotes that allegedly support that narrative are oftentimes based on like broad jump,
Hmm.
or even like a 20-meter sprint time or something. Be like, oh yeah, I've been training strength, training strength, training strength, and oh look, here's a broad jump record, and or here's a 20-meter sprint record, and so look, strength training does not interfere with speed, does not interfere with athleticism. It's like, I don't think the people who are putting that theory out are testing fly times regularly,
Yeah.
or even 100-meter times. Um, yeah, I think, maybe in some cases they have some experience with track athletes, and it's like, yeah, okay, so they got stronger in the off season and they ended up sprinting faster in track season. Okay, yes, we know that. Like, we know that
Yeah.
that scenario exists.
Hmm.
Um, but that doesn't mean it exists permanently for that athlete. It definitely doesn't mean it exists for all athletes. And so, yeah, I think there's this, yeah, if you're looking at broad jump or even standing vert, um, very different, very different results in terms of having to manage strength and speed than if you're looking at fly times,
Hmm.
yeah, track and field times, long jump time, or long jump distances, things like that. Yeah, it's a whole different world when it's, like you said, a tenth of a second off the ground versus, a broad jump. You might have like a half second,
Yeah.
like load up and big push out. It's just a completely different thing. So, uh, yeah, I mean, the interference is real for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, especially if you're comparing to, a time when a sprinter was fresh and, tuned into sprinting. It's going to be very hard to replicate that, or to beat those old times in a period when he's been squatting for 4 months straight,
Yeah. Exactly.
Um,
Especially if
so
they're
yeah,
fast. It's one thing if your fly 10 time is 130.
right.
Okay.
That's another
You
thing.
know, but if you're running 0.85,
Yeah.
that's going to be very easy to disrupt that because of the amount of, neural drive and freshness and just that. You have to be so twitchy and ready to go to run that fast. I've
Hmm.
never run that fast. I would like to, but
Yeah.
you know,
Wouldn't we all?
and it's like, so you also have to once again look at who are you working with, and how prone are they going to be to being disrupted by it? And also it goes back to how strong are you? If you can only squat 95 pounds,
Hmm.
I don't know if that's going to be as disruptive as if you can squat 500 pounds and you're trying to push strength. Just the,
Right.
the pure stress involved systemically with that is different. And I think in talking to a lot of people who are training and want to get faster, who have sort of a powerlifting background or a really strength dominant background, which I can relate to. I spent a lot of years just trying to be as strong as I could.
Hmm.
Sometimes it can be a little scary to move away from that thing that is your comfort zone, which maybe your thing is you can squat heavy and it makes you feel good and it's fun and people look at you at the gym like, wow, that guy's really strong or whatever. But you have to be willing to sacrifice that thing that you're good at if you really do want to run fast. You have to be willing to move away from that thing that is your comfort zone, which may be very heavy lifting, and trust that your body will be able to use those qualities better when you're fresh. And that can be a hard concept to get across to people because it's very easy to look at the bar and say, oh, I got 5 plates on there. I'm ready to go. But
Uh-huh.
then when you get away from that, there's a little mystery involved, and so if you're someone out there who is in this situation, be willing to shift to those things that Dan mentioned of doing the jump squats or doing the power cleans and focusing on just accelerating that load very rapidly and let just see what happens. You'll probably surprise yourself, probably jump higher, run faster, and feel better when you're out at the track.
Yep. And this is the concept behind some of the jump training programs that
Hmm.
I've put out over the years where you have different program options, and you're addressing where the athlete is at with respect to strength and jumping ability.
Hmm.
And yeah, if you have someone who is disproportionately developed in strength, then just continuing to get stronger, very low chance it's going to be
Yeah.
effective.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have somebody with, great jumping background, let's say they started dunking or dunking on a low rim when they were a kid, and they've been doing it for 5+ years, and also just like playing sports and just being an athlete, and maybe have a little bit of genetic talent. When that athlete adds strength training, they're going to take off athletically,
Yep.
right? So the context makes a big difference. Um, and so yeah, you have those, you have the anecdote of this person started strength training, and in 2 months they added 6 inches to their vert, and their 40 came down like 3/10, and it's like it's all great. But the opposite scenario also exists,
Yeah.
of, oh, this athlete maybe less explosive talent, maybe not as much of a like sprinting, jumping background, and maybe they just sort of maybe they played a sport like maybe it was a football but maybe they were a linebacker or something, and they didn't train speed as much, and then they just like got into lifting, and then over the course of, let's say, a year or two of lifting, they got a bunch stronger, but they're slower than they used to be now.
Hmm.
Like both of those things exist, and yeah, you got to be willing to, again, just like test your speed,
Yeah.
test your vert, like find out what is
Hmm.
happening, and then make adjustments accordingly. Yeah, I just hate when people are like, oh no, just do this and it will
Yeah.
work. Like I just actually, oh goodness, just recently had somebody come on to one of my Instagram posts, which was not even about this topic.
Of course.
And he came on there just like, this doesn't matter, just train absolute strength. I promise if you do 12 weeks of box squat training, your vert will go up. Just like,
Dude.
first of all, I didn't say anything about like not doing absolute strength training. Like that was
Right.
not, and I wouldn't say that. Like I'm a
Yeah,
huge
you're a huge
proponent
proponent of it.
of absolute strength training. But yeah, but even though I am a huge proponent, I would not make a guarantee to somebody about 12 weeks of box squat training and improving their vertical.
Yeah.
Um, in some cases, I would say, yeah, you could probably expect it, but I can't promise it. And then in other cases, I'd be like, no, this is the wrong thing for you.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think you just have to be willing to assess and then come up with solutions accordingly. And then even once you come up with your solution, test as you go and find out
Yeah.
if it's working. And I think, yeah, a lot of people just don't do that. They don't confront themselves with the results.
Right.
They just sort of want to believe in something, and they'll do it for a while, and then yeah, maybe somewhere down the road they'll realize like, man, this has
Yeah.
not been working.
Yeah, it ain't
Uh,
working out. And there's no
so
excuse to
yeah,
not test now because, you can get the My Jump app and you can look at vertical jump, broad jump, RSI. You can, if you have a Windows computer, you can get Canovia for free, film
right,
from the side over a 10-meter fly. You can test for virtually $0. So
yeah, it's a lot of
there's no
options.
reason not to. Yeah. And that can
Yep.
give you, as someone who's self-coached, I don't have a coach telling me what to do, which can be tough because I find it's a lot easier to assess someone else's program or look at someone else's technique and figure out what they need to work on. Whereas with myself, you look at your own videos 1,000 times and it just sort of becomes a blur, you don't always see the little details. And so by tracking what I'm doing, if I'm tracking it in the gym, I'm tracking what I'm doing on the track, that can at least give me some objective data to show me, am I moving in the right direction? Where might some
Mhm.
gaps be that my biases with how I think about training, I wouldn't, if I was just thinking about it, I wouldn't see those little gaps. But when you are able to test different types of variables, that can at least keep you grounded in what is really going on, so you don't fool yourself and think, oh yeah, I'm getting faster because I feel great. Well, awesome, but are you?
Yeah.
And you can do it for
Yep.
$0, so there's no reason not to.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a guy he was one of the first track athletes that I worked with, and this was in Wisconsin. I worked with him in person. I was just, we went to the same school, and he had some really good results in like his first year of training with me. Then I moved to Texas, and I was like doing his workouts remotely, and I remember him telling me like, "Oh, I feel really powerful," and I was like, "Okay, but like, are you fast?"
Yeah, yeah,
And then it ended up I don't remember like this is 7 or 8 years ago now at this point, but I don't remember the exact thing, but whenever he like got into a race, it was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, you're fine, but you're
hmm
not like a special fast right now.
right.
So, there's still something we got to go through here to like translate over. And so yeah, with him, the regular approach, or like kind of the approach we ended up using, was like more or less not lifting in for maybe 6 weeks in indoor season, and then again in outdoor, like a good chunk. And he had a lot of success. He did heptathlon in the indoor season, and then 400 hurdles
Ooh,
in outdoor.
damn.
And yeah, he was sort of a D3 track Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
But he had a lot of success with that, as far as I think, yeah, the first year I trained him, he PR'd in his first 400 hurdles race, and then he didn't lift for 7 weeks, and he ran 2.5 seconds faster in his last race than his first race.
Whoa.
So yeah, over the course of the year, he ended up getting a more than a 3 second PR, and he got into D3 nationals with it. So it was like,
hmm
you know, really, it was good because it actually shows both sides of the equation we've been talking about. He wasn't very strong when I met him, and so we started strength training, and it did a lot for him, like short term. But then when it got to season, we also took the strength training away, and then he got even better.
Right.
So again, I could have just said, "Oh, look, strength training works because he got a PR." Okay, but there's still potential for him to do much more if we allow him to shift to specificity here.
Yep.
So yeah, it kind of demonstrated the benefits of strength training, but also how getting away from it can work. So um, yeah, just an example that came to mind.
Yeah, and it goes back to when are you doing something? If you just look at an exercise or uh, a certain style of training, in and of itself, you can say, yes, this works or works to do something. But when are you applying that stimulus, and how does that fit into your overall progression throughout the year? That's really where a lot of this stuff can be effective, and that's why in my videos, like, sometimes people are a little frustrated because they want me to tell them the workout that's going to make them faster or the exercise, and it's like it's not about that. It's about how do you sequence everything over time to get you in
Yeah,
the right, you have to develop your preparedness, like the strength training, get prepared, but then we also have to get into a state of readiness, and what gets you prepared versus what gets you ready to perform might be two different things. And going back to what you said about, for example, getting stronger and seeing, oh, our 20 improved and our broad jump improved, but maybe that's not going to be reflected in max velocity. When you think about training someone, say you have one athlete who they're good at top end, but their acceleration is lacking. Another athlete where they accelerate really well, but the top end is lacking. Are you training those athletes in general? Obviously, there's always going to be, you got to look at the athlete first, but big picture, are there differences in how you're training the athlete who needs to develop acceleration more versus the athlete who needs to really just hone their top speed? Are there any major differences there that you see?
yeah. So I think first of all, I'd rather have an athlete that has the top speed.
Yeah.
If we are talking about a sprinting like a track situation, um, that athlete, I'm gonna feel good about getting stronger and training jumps and stuff like that, and that having a good translation to their acceleration, and
Hmm.
then also because they are apparently already like elastically adapted, um, not gonna have a lot of concern about like ruining that or disrupting that with the strength training. Like it's probably going to be minor disruption, right?
Hmm.
um, Whereas the athlete that's a better accelerator is probably already better in the strength and power department,
Right.
probably going to have good jumps and stuff already. So then it's like, well, we need to more specifically, like you need to sprint and run a lot.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I would be gravitating more towards like a really complete running program for that athlete, and trying to specifically develop that lightness on their feet, that quickness off the ground that they need for top speed, or the elasticity is the term I use a lot. And then yeah, that the strength training side for them may be more like, well, okay, let's do some hex bar deadlift, rather than some deep squats, maybe. And of course it would be based on testing too. Like
Yeah, of
if the
course.
athlete was somehow a really great accelerator but didn't have good strength to body weight ratio, then I would still be like, okay, well, let's raise that up.
Yeah.
Um, but like they probably do have a good strength to body weight ratio. They probably already have like good jumps. And
Hmm.
so then, yeah, in terms of their, the whole year, training that strength would probably be a smaller section of the year, right? And then I'd probably, I want them doing more running in off season, or more running total throughout the year, because yeah, they're trying to specifically build up that piece. Now that's all, like an initial assessment, and then as you
See how it
go,
goes.
you find out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's my big thing is I still have people who will ask me like, hey, like what should my yearly plan look like? And I'm like, I mean, I could tell you something, but you shouldn't like just plan on sticking to it.
Yep.
Like you should be figuring it out as you go. You have the ability to do that. It's not like you
Hmm.
have to plan 8 months of training right now.
Right.
Um, so yeah, just big on testing, thinking about things, using some
Hmm.
critical thinking, understanding what's happening to your body, and then come up with a solution as you go.
Yep. On the topic of elasticity, is there anything that you tend to go back to that is kind of a staple in your training for developing elasticity, whether that could be little hopping exercises, more intense plyometrics, tempo running, anything that you find that has worked fairly well for you with improving elasticity? Because I know some people are of the opinion that it's more just inherent to the athlete, but I think it can certainly be developed. Obviously you may not get to the level of elasticity of a, elite triple jumper or whatever, but
Right.
it's certain. I believe it. I've seen it myself. I've gone from sometimes I was at an RSI of, 2.6, and then there's other times where I've been at 4.0. I'm
Yeah.
probably more elastic when I'm at 4.0 than 2.6, so something can change. So
Yeah.
what do you do in that regard when you're looking at someone and you say, okay, this person might be strong or explosive, but the elasticity is lacking? What are you looking at there as far as training inputs that you can use to improve that?
Yeah. I think running volume is a big
Hmm.
one. So yeah, I think kind of the sports performance world outside of track wants the solution to be, yeah, intensive plyometrics
Yeah.
and fly times. Those are the sexy solutions, and those are the
Mhm.
um, it's like the explosion principle, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
everything we do is just like explosive, as fast as we can do, and that's how you train to get fast. And that doesn't have it's not completely illegitimate. Like we do
Mhm.
want to train fast, and we do want to be able to do like higher intensity plyometrics, but I really think you need to have a base of lower intensity.
'Cause
Um,
then you can get the training volume in. with
Right.
what you're trying to develop.
And I think, uh, yeah, one even from a safety standpoint, like you want to
Yeah.
use the lower intensity to build up tissues like more gradually and more gently, rather
Hmm.
than just like hurdle hops and fly times. Just jump right to the most intense things we can do. Especially for an athlete who maybe doesn't have the elastic training background. So you take even like myself, a lot of 2 foot jumping and squatting background. And so coming from years of that, and then you just throw fly times and hurdle hops at me, like my shins are gonna be at
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that like that base of lower intensity is really helpful, and honestly, probably I don't know if I can say more important, but like getting volume where you're bouncing off the ground thousands of times over the course of a week or a month, years,
Hmm.
it gives you that lightness on your feet probably better than sprinting 50 meters for 4 reps and then
Yeah.
hopping over like 5 hurdles like five sets. Again, I think you want to look at history. If I have a track athlete that's been running for a decade, and some section of the year has had high volume in it for a long time, then they probably have that in place, and so maybe they have less of a need to do that all year long now. Whereas someone like myself that wants to go from being a good jumper, but like a relatively heavy, slow jumper, and
Hmm.
then I want to get better at trying to dunk from distance off 1 foot, or I want to get better at bounding far, or I want to improve my fly time. Like I need to build up a history of running
Hmm.
that I didn't get as a youth.
Yep.
And so then that becomes really important for me. So, and I do think the extensive plyometrics, the lower intensity plyometrics have a role there as well. Um, but even those one are not as specific if I am trying to get faster,
Hmm.
and two, like you have to watch your volume on those a bit too.
Yeah.
um Whereas running is going to allow me, I could, if I do like, let's say, a fast jog, I could easily do 1,000 meters a day of that and not be like testing the limits of my lower legs, or like
Right.
wearing myself down.
Hmm.
Yeah, I could do, let's say, 18 to 20 second 100 meter pace,
Hmm.
and yeah, so that by itself, is that training my speed? No, because I'm not getting the nervous system to fire. It's not like I'm not developing the coordination. I'm not developing some of the muscular things that I need for sprinting, like the stimulus on your hip flexors, your hamstrings, that type of thing. So there's obviously a lot missing from that as a speed training stimulus, but it is gonna, let's say if it was 1,000 meters per day, I mean, that's 500 bounces off the ground per day.
Yeah.
Every foot or every stride is a bounce off the ground. It's a low
Hmm.
intensity plyometric, and having that background plays a big role. And so, yeah, I mean, I've had the experience of during quarantine, I was on a track or on a trail 5 days per week, and then and so then I was doing fast days, like fast short sprints. I was doing fast like 150 days, and then I was doing a lot of easy 100 meters or easy 30-second runs,
Hmm.
things of that on sort of the down days to build up that volume. And my 150 got a lot faster during quarantine,
Yeah.
over the course of like 6 to 8 weeks. And then also, I turn 35 next month. Uh, Last week, I had a personal best one leg RSI, and so
Hmm.
and that was on my right leg, which is actually my less capable leg.
Nice.
I got jumper's knee on my left right now, so I'm not doing it on my left.
Yeah.
And but so yeah, I beat my best left leg score with my right leg.
Damn, nice.
And that's, even at my age, like this type of ability is able to develop and change.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm also like I'm not especially strong right now,
Hmm.
so it's not just like, oh, my balance is up because my squat's up or something.
Right.
Um, because again, I'm working through jumper's knee, so like my strength
Hmm.
is like
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
not at its best. So yeah, the idea that this stuff is like just sort of, genetic and you can't develop it is complete trash.
Yeah.
I think, much of the athletic development field doesn't know how to develop it. And maybe historically they've, you know, you do like a 6 week squat program, you can see changes during that time.
Hmm.
And maybe, and that makes people believe in that. And maybe, doing plyos twice per week for 6 weeks didn't necessarily like create measurable change. It's like, oh, we just can't change it.
Hmm.
Well, no, you just weren't doing the right thing for the right, like for long enough.
Yeah.
Um, and for the skeptics of this, you got to look at people who are light on their feet and what they have done to get there.
Yeah.
If you look at, I mean, obviously people know sprinters are like really bouncy, right?
Hmm.
But even look at 800 runners, look at mile
Yeah.
runners, look at cross country people. A lot of them will have a higher RSI than a football player.
Yep.
Even like a skill position football player who is like a good athlete and who's fast, like fast accelerator and stuff. They're not necessarily like really light on their feet and bouncy off the ground.
Hmm.
So yeah, if I have somebody who trains for the 5K and they can walk in and no jumping background or like even like plyometric background or strength training background, and they can hit a 3.0 RSI, and I got a football player who sprints and squats and does jumps of different types and is like a good overall athlete, and they're hitting a 2.6 RSI. What does that tell you about the development of elastic capabilities?
Yep.
It is not all about intensity, and it's not all about yeah, it's definitely not all about like strength and power.
Hmm.
So
I mean, look at
yeah,
Kipchoge. When you watch those guys run his training group, they literally just bounce across the ground the whole way, and they run
right,
miles and miles and miles and miles. This is a marathon,
effortless.
but it's so effortless. And how have they developed that? By doing a lot of, obviously they're running fast because they're super elite athletes, but in the scheme of the fastest types of runs versus not, they're not running very fast compared to an elite sprinter, but
Right.
they're getting so many contacts in that to get through that, you have to be elastic. If I'm going to go do 10 by 150 at 60%, pretty slow. If I just, if I try to muscle my way through that, it's going to be a much more painful workout than if I bounce my way through it, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
And when I've gone through periods where I skip the low intensity plyos or I skip the tempo running, I notice that I simply don't have the same ability to bounce off of the ground, even if I'm doing depth jumps, and with
Yeah.
depth jumps and drop jumps, the amount of volume you can get in is just very limited. It's almost to me at this point more of a testing mechanism than a developmental mechanism because
Right.
I can only do so much before my Achilles are going to be pissed off or my knee gets bugged or it's just, a little too intense considering all the other training that I'm doing. Whereas the low
Yeah.
intensity plyos or the tempo runs where the goal is almost to like when I'm coaching the kids and we're doing pogos, I'm like, you need to make it easy. You need to bounce off
Yes.
the ground as quickly as you can,
Relaxed.
get high in the air, but make it easy. Don't work for it. Because then we're probably going to be utilizing more elastic tissue because elastic tissue doesn't, last time I checked, doesn't have much of an energy requirement, it's
Right.
just stretch, just doing this. It's like a rubber band.
And you
So
don't activate it with effort.
exactly.
Yeah.
So using low intensity forms of training, you know, I feel like it's commonly been thought that that's purely just for work capacity or conditioning. But
Yeah.
there's so many other benefits you can get. And, this year I've put more of that training into my program. And then all of a sudden, my 150 goes down by almost 4/10 of a second.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the only thing that led up to it. There's a few changes I've made in my program, but that's one of the biggest changes I've made. And I feel it when I'm out at the track. It's just, I go through my drills, I go through my warm-up runs. Everything feels a little easier because I'm able to get off the ground without having to muscle my way through it. And you can train that through these low intensity forms of training with a lower risk, and you can get great reward out of it. You don't have to drop off of a 3 meter box, smash your knees into the ground, and do two of them, and then and then you're done
Right.
for the day. You know. So
Yeah. So yeah, and a few points like along with that. So one, when we're talking about this stuff, for the listeners, we don't necessarily mean conditioning.
right.
Like when I was doing, 16-second 100 meters by 10 for 10 reps, and then I mean I was taking probably 3 minutes between those, and it's an easy run. Like it was not a
You're not,
hard workout at
yeah, you're
all.
not gassed.
I
No.
was I was walking away from that like, oh, let's go jump up the stairs, like
Yeah.
I had energy after that. And then also having that having that volume in place for a while, after you have that, taking more off days can be really good.
Yeah.
So I've had people who some track athletes who, they come off of high school track season where they've been running a bunch because, they were in
Hmm.
relays and they were doing, 200, maybe even 400, whatever, running a bunch. And then they train fast twice per week and do nothing else. And then they'll, short term in that month, they might actually do spectacularly.
Yep.
Like, okay, well, your fly time is faster now than it was during track season.
Hmm.
So after that period of higher volume, you can definitely benefit from like cutting it down and doing just intense stuff. Um, and then I think there was one more point I had in my head. Shoot. I think it was on the topic of the low effort, the
Yeah, making it
relaxing,
easy. Yeah.
making it easy. Um, yeah, I mean, going back to sort of that like cross country example, I think it goes to show that the nature of elasticity is somewhat involuntary.
Yeah.
You're building up tissues and probably even shaping tissues, right?
Hmm.
In a way that they're being used without you putting effort in,
Yeah.
right? Like and this is something I wish we had more research on because I would like to understand it more. Um, is it the fascial tension around the ankle, and in the lower leg? Is that a big piece of it? And this is where it gets into my ankle mobility post from yesterday.
Yep. Yeah.
So like when people have that fascial tension, that tightness around the ankle, and then if that is contributing to their bouncing off the ground, well, you don't have neurons connected to your fascia that like make it contract hard.
Right.
It's that that contribution is not coming from your effort.
Hmm.
It's just like involuntary. It's just it resists deformation, and so it just creates stiffness for you naturally,
Hmm.
without effort. And so I think that's a big component of this, and that's where that's one of the reasons that volume helps is because you're developing that involuntary subconscious just natural effortless bounce off the ground. um Whereas people love to talk about training your nervous system to be fast and all that, and that
Hmm.
has legitimacy too. I'm not
Yep.
saying muscles don't matter, but it's not the whole picture.
Right.
So yeah, think we got some of the same thinking on this topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't really heard anybody else frame it in that way. Like I haven't really heard anybody talk about it like that, but as an athlete, as a coach, I've just seen it happen where, you do this for a while, all of a sudden, wow, easier to bounce off the ground and everything then becomes easier. Like I went out and ran 100 the other day after doing some flying sprints, and it just, and same with the 150 that I ran where I set a personal best, they were like the easiest runs that I've ever had.
Yeah.
I didn't have to force it. And whereas when I did force it, I ran slower. Now you're causing discoordination in the system, or you're activating an agonist muscle too late in the movement, so now the limb can't reverse and go in the other direction. So you're kind of holding yourself back because you're fighting, your hip flexors pulling one way, your glutes pulling the other way, and it slows the movement down. And so when we do these forms of training, not only can we improve the ability to be elastic, which helps your efficiency and helps you get through a race with less of an energy demand, I would imagine. But
Hmm.
it can also probably help teach what it feels like to move explosively, but without grinding your way through it, because that's a very hard concept to get across to people. Is max intensity is not the same in a deadlift. How a max intensity deadlift feels versus a max intensity sprint that's going to get you to your fastest times. It's a very different sensation within your body. So
Yes.
we do want to do very high intensity training. We do want to push those boundaries when it's appropriate and safe to do so, but also have something in the program that teaches the athlete to feel light, to feel like they're moving with minimal effort. It doesn't mean that they're technically sloppy. The effort can be directed into managing their posture, making sure they're, doing the movement right, but it's not gritting your way to the outcome. It's sort of
Yeah.
flowing your way there. And I think if more people can grasp that, they'd probably find some benefits, I think. Uh,
Yeah. And that's another thing that you can really teach yourself with testing
mhm.
is, and so you talked about like the 150, and there being a difference when you like tried really hard. Even a 40 can be that way.
Oh yeah.
Or even like I do flying 20s pretty often with, that's like kind of my go-to distance with my athletes. And particularly the ones outside of track, I guess, who don't have as much of a, top speed sprinting background, and they're just not as like practiced on it.
Yeah.
They'll like, it's not everybody, but definitely some people ask them to run 90% and like
It's faster.
smooth, and they'll run a faster fly time than if you tell them
Yeah.
to go 100%.
Yep.
And sometimes it happens in one workout, but sometimes it's even consistent
Hmm.
over the course of time. Like if they try hard, they run slower.
Yep.
And even, yeah, even in a flying 20, like that short distance, you're talking about, 2 to 2.5 seconds, like depending on how good the athlete is. Even in that tiny time frame, that like that relaxation can make a difference. And you would expect that relaxation is all about efficiency, maybe.
Hmm.
And so that, oh, it's just going to make me faster over a 200. Well, no, it might actually make you faster over a flying 20.
Yep.
Yeah, like even short distance, your max velocity can be higher with what feels like a less effort sometimes.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's all very counterintuitive, but you
Yeah.
can,
And
yeah, if you start testing things, you can find out sometimes like, oh wow, that's what actually makes me run fast.
exactly. And you can, when then the trick becomes, okay, how do we bring that into competition? Because it's one thing to
Yeah.
do it in practice when there's no less of a fear of failure or, less of a desire to win or whatever because you're just doing your thing at practice. Then when we get in competition, can we stay composed? And that's why, you know, mental confidence and the mental side of being an athlete comes into play, which is a little bit more than we have time to get into today here. But
Right, right.
just want to make that point that, once we develop those qualities in practice and we can prove that that produces a better time, then maybe athletes can be a little bit more willing to try to be relaxed when they run in a race or to replicate that when the stress level's higher and when they're more willing or more likely to just, blast out and be all over the place because they're all revved up by competition. The trick then becomes how do we transfer that there, and that's it's a tough question to answer, but something that
Yeah,
comes to mind. Um, I know
for
we're
for
running
sure.
up
Yeah.
on the time here. One question I had is, how have you liked using the 1080 in
Mm.
in your training?
Yeah,
Pretty expensive.
it's expensive. It's good. Um, I would say I am not a huge believer in resisted sprints.
Yeah.
I definitely think they can have the, some benefits for, I mean, one, teaching people stuff. Like you just get a feeling of, what it's like to push yourself forward. And
Right.
as as simple as pushing is, like it's not always built into people.
Hmm.
Some people like to just move their feet fast.
Yeah.
And well, and also some people can be fast just moving their feet fast. That's another
Right. Yeah.
another topic where we don't want to force people into a mold necessarily, but yeah, like you can get people to feel things. You can by keeping them moving a little bit slower than a regular sprint, you can get them more feel for like closed shin angles and
Hmm.
striking back at the ground, and you can get like more reps practicing that feel, and so it can be helpful in that type of thing. um, I think it can be good for physical development even,
Hmm.
where you could use it as a strength stimulus, in the case of somebody where you don't want to do disruptive strength. You
Yeah.
can actually get some more strength out of that. um, or it could be a uh, yeah, just like that, what the horizontal to vertical
Right.
ratio,
Yeah.
maybe by getting more work where you are generating a large horizontal force, or larger than a regular sprint, like there is some level of adaptation in the body there. um, but generally I view it as like, well, I want to sprint fast, I don't want to sprint
Yeah.
slow.
You don't want to slow yourself down.
Yeah, like I want to train fast, so then this then it's like a small piece of the puzzle here. um, But I mean, you are though you're getting exposure to more of like your drive phase, basically, or
Hmm.
more of your start, depending on how heavy you do the resistance. Um, so all that being said, resistance sprinting, I'm not like that high on it, but it is a tool. But the 1080 with its measurement capabilities
Hmm.
does give us, more insight there. And that's where I like it more. Like if we didn't have a 1080, I would do very little like sled pulling or pushing.
Yeah. I've done
Um, you
almost
know,
none in the last this whole year. I did it for like a couple weeks maybe. And just
yeah,
intuitively, I felt like I don't know if this is helping me right now.
right.
I don't see the transfer to my times. I don't, it makes me more tired when I use them, but other than
Yes.
that, I don't know what I'm getting out of it. But with the 1080, like you said, you got all the data, so that can give you some great insights, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So, things that you can get from there, like you can see people will have nice, clean, smooth peaks
Hmm.
on their power curve. Um, or they might have really ugly, jagged, like just like noisy things,
Yeah.
and I think that clues you in a little bit to some of their abilities. Now, there's definitely other ways that you can figure those types of things out, but so yeah, the career track athlete, with great elastic ability, and maybe who's not like been poisoned by too much squatting, they tend to have the smooth, nice curves.
Hmm.
um, even like with heavier resistance, they'll tend to have that. Whereas, your football or your rugby guy might have like the ugly stuff. And even if they are fast on the resisted sprint, like the curve might look more ugly. And
Hmm.
I think that's cluing you into their abilities a little bit. Um, you'll get the up and down pattern where you got one leg that's doing way higher than the other one on the power curve or on the force curve.
Hmm.
Yeah, it measures force, speed, and power. You can get those different graphs, and so that can clue you into differences in the legs a little bit, which is good. And for the record, like an asymmetry there is not necessarily a problem. Like that's pretty
Right.
normal.
Yeah.
I would say the time where it really came into play was I had a post ACL guy.
Mm.
So he had been through rehab for six plus months. He was a running back, so he had returned to football. returned to strength training. Like he was basically doing everything again. And he comes to see me, and on the 1080 with like a light resistance, it was 3 kilograms. His ACL leg more or less disappeared from the power graph as he got up to speed. So in
Mm.
the beginning, it was like a little bit up and down, and then as he got up to higher speeds, that one leg basically instead of having a spike, it just turned into noise.
Oh.
Yeah, and so he had been through, the whole rehab process, and I was like, okay, but there's still something here missing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had him start hopping on that leg, sort of like not high intensity, but like medium intensity, a few times per week. And 2 weeks later, he had like a pretty normal looking graph.
Wow.
Yeah, like the ACL leg started to have that spike show up in there. Um,
Do you think that
so
was just inhibition from the brain or something like that?
it's hard to say. Yeah, I mean, maybe some inhibition, but then also maybe there's some element to the like that reactive strength or that
Mm-hmm.
elastic component that he wasn't getting from
Yeah.
just football and lifting.
So you had to kind
And
of bridge the gap between.
yeah, like he needed some more bouncing off the ground on that leg to really, yeah, it's hard to say exactly what the adaptation would have been there.
Yeah.
Especially since it happened pretty fast. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you're inclined to think that it was more of a, yeah, like a brain or nervous system type thing, rather than like dramatic structural changes in 2 weeks.
Right.
But I mean, maybe it's probably more holistic,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so that was the case with it. Like the 1080 really came in handy. I also like it does give you a peek into like that strength versus speed concept. So we do like kind of our standard is 10 kilo testing is like sort of the heavier one. We will mess around with 15 or even 30, but I view that as more of like a strength training stimulus
Yeah.
than testing. And so that 10 kilo resistance is like that's fairly heavy for a good athlete, but like they're still moving pretty fast. But so you can see sometimes their strength will be very connected with that.
Mm.
Like a 20-meter time with 10 kilos resistance, they can get stronger and like get way better at that resisted sprint. They might not get faster at their regular sprint at the same time.
Interesting.
So that gives you that insight into, what are strength and speed doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the 10 kilo test is a relatively, it's not super taxing. Like you can hit a few reps of that like pretty much any day you wanted to,
Right.
unless someone's just like completely thrashed. It's not like a high risk or like super demanding on the body. So yeah, it's a way that you can say like, oh look, this resistance sprint got faster. That's a really good sign for the future. But if your regular sprints aren't faster, maybe we need to shift a little bit, or maybe you just need to rest some more, to get the more sensitive ability to kick up here. But yeah, so it can be helpful in that. But yeah, if we weren't testing and getting that data, then if it was just a box with a string in it, I would probably use it very, very little. Yeah.
That's pretty funny. Nah, but it makes total sense. Well, I think this has been really good practical information for people, and concepts that are down to earth that people can actually think about and apply in their training. So really
Mhm.
suggest anybody who is into this stuff should follow you. So where's the best place for them to follow you on Instagram, YouTube, and all that?
Yeah, so Instagram got jump.science, or the speed one is speed.science0. Those are the two accounts. Yeah, at some point just wanted like an outlet for speed content specifically,
Yeah.
because I felt like doing a 5-part series on low heel recovery on jump science just wasn't really, just not really hitting the what my audience is looking for there. So
Yeah.
just wanted a separate outlet. And then yeah, just jump science. I think I am on YouTube, something like that. If
Yeah,
you
I think
if
it's
you
just jump
YouTube, yeah,
science.
it'll pop up. So yeah, YouTube. Some of the same stuff I post there, but sometimes you get like some longer videos with like more explanation and stuff on YouTube. So
Well, I'll make sure
And
to
then,
tag it all in the video so people can click over and
yeah,
subscribe and all
thanks.
that.
And I do have a website with articles as well, which I know a
Hmm.
lot of people don't like to read a 2,000 word article or whatever. But if you just type jump.science into a web browser, that's my website as well. So
It's a
there's
good domain.
yeah, it's a fun option. Whenever I made that website, I was like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's no
Yeah.
.com on it, just jump.science.
Legit. Any other
Yeah.
topics you want to cover before we shut down here?
Uh, Nothing comes to mind immediately. I think we covered a lot
Okay.
of good stuff. So yeah,
Sweet. Well, if anything comes up, we can always bring you on for another one and
yeah,
continue
be
the
down.
conversation there. But I really appreciate your time, man. I know you're busy with training and everything, but I think it's good info for people, and you really help keep me grounded, and I think help other people keep grounded and not getting too over the top with complex training or going down too many rabbit holes. It's like let's focus on these big rocks of training. Let's look at it with critical thinking, use a mix of intuition as well as you know being grounded in science. And I think that's good stuff, and we need more of that out there. So I appreciate you and the content you put out there and your time today.
Yeah, thanks for those kind words, man. That means a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is
definitely.
fun talk.
Awesome.